Now, I almost got excited. The Crickets wouldn't play today. Isn't that interesting? Is there a shift in the matrix? That was kind of neat. Maybe we're on the verge of a change. Time is now. I was hearing the Ron Stevens show that the Poe Project coming in. The time is now. It was in Kanukistan. And I noticed the news bud saying the time is now. I've been saying the time is now for 18, 20 years, something like that. Maybe it's now time is now. Maybe those Crickets not playing this morning. That was pretty interesting. Maybe we're on the verge, folks. Maybe you're not going to continue being quiet and letting all this stuff happen to you. Wherever you is and wherever you be and whatever's happened. We can all do that. We can allow it to come on us, and we can make excuses how it all don't work. Or, as I've been trying to show you, the way I have found it, in the way I have proceeded through, and maybe it was a unique way to go, but it still was the way to go. And I come here today, even if some of you didn't see the way I saw it. I'm here to try and explain all the ways we can get at what's ailing us. And it's really just killing us. It's destroying us. We have a little bit of the news about that also. Right? I don't know if you're looking at the surface of things, looking through what's transparent. I keep trying to point out all these things that are working on us. We always seem to be focused on the wrong stuff. We're not focused on anything. It's the worst thing. If you didn't, you won't hear it on the broadcast, and maybe you picked up it was a little late. Those Crickets did not play. I had a problem somewhere, and those Crickets would not play today. I'm almost encouraged by that little anomaly. Isn't that funny? Isn't that how this all works, it seems? Maybe time is finally now. I've been saying that. I wrote that 20 years ago or so. Time is now, and I've been waiting. Now it's time. No, now it's time. And so there's people coming up, they're using the term time is now, and that's fine. Let's have it happen. Let's do something. Now, I want to address an email without getting too specific. I don't like getting too specific with the who and what and where, but touching on some topics of how to address stuff generally. And I appreciate your email. Talking about when I say things and you go and do the research, it inspires you. You see what's sitting in there as tools for us to use. That's undeniable. And so that's why when I hear people denying it, I realize they've either not capable, don't want to be capable, are just contrarians no matter where they go, or have given up. And want to be the accessory to the crime against us, without any acknowledgement at all that there may be some small part that can be played someplace else. In other words, if you listen to me, I don't go everywhere to make a battle. I mean, you really have to pick the battle, and that's what I've been trying to suggest as well. Find the wrong you need to make right. You make that decision. It can be a small project, but get into engaging it so that you understand how to start working through. And I don't know how that'd be a problem in any life. I tend to talk about some bigger issues on the broadcast, but I just go by the news. The news is what they want us to know, and they're directing us on what's going on. And to me, that's a place to go, because it just seems after 3 decades of doing this, I tend to be on maybe the higher scale of engagement, because what when I do this land disposal law, that's your whole entire nation. And so everything starts to come from being affected, can affect that. So it's not hard for me to jump from one thing to the next. And one of the, I can say non-complaints, it's an observation people do, that I jump around from place to place. And that's a little bit of a problem, but like I said, I can only speak to the generality, and I hope that I inspire something in you, and those of you in this email saying that you go to certain places. In this case, the starting of it was I suggested going to the UCC in a particular capacity. The emailer went there and found some meat, that they could turn around and use to whatever effect that they have attempted and continue, and got some traction. Now, the traction they got is unknown. The actual cause within what they did with it, which is simply writing more specific letters relative to a guidance that we get out of the code. The UCC is just nothing but a code. You'll find it in your different states as adoptions of the federal 1963 transfer from negotiable instruments law. There's some guidelines on how you proceed to do things better. And I've been an advocate for a long, long time about making records, making a record before you move so that you don't get in trouble. I hear lots of people, they're victims of their own wish to make a point. But a lot of this has been preceded in ignorance, and I've been there too. I'm not immune of it. That's how I got to where I am, and understanding how we start to move more so there's less or no jeopardy upon us. And making a record is super important to set the standard. And that's really all I really try to show you, is that there's a standard to be set, and you can go find the guidance that everyone has to recognize, or you know that they're a criminal. So I want to touch a couple things in this email. I'm going to go through near the bottom, because it starts there on requesting of me maybe some direction from an email that had some success on going after some conditions on some loans or something that were a problem, bill collection or whatever, and took attack and used some different people, some different hosts that have different information, and pulled something together, and apparently, from what it worked for him. But there's some more questions about how we go and address lots of things, and is listed here, and bringing more to note, like I've been suggesting, you find within the context of the action of someone who's coming against you, or has come against someone else, or maybe the public at large, if I can say it that way without too many dissenting voices about what the public means. The people here, and not even that. Each one of you, if someone comes against you in an official capacity, or under a color of an authority, how you bring that felony in. I want to address one point, though, that there's a lot of subject matter issues. Like they start from geoengineering to Wi-Fi, 5G, assaults of our freedom and health, broad spectrum approach, and that's a little. I just suggest that's a little too broad. And a couple of the issues are almost, in my mind at this point, and I haven't been able to focus on them, are a little bit beyond what we can do. I don't know how to stop geoengineering. What I do know, and this is where we start to see even within some of these things, you have to get down to the one subject matter. And you have to then go and research what that subject matter is about. Not what you're told it's about, and not all the hype, and not the opinions, and not be walking wounded about how you're being affected by it, or you look up and cough, because you see the chemtrails and all this, or persistent contrails. I mean, and as I say, understand your terrain before you start moving. Then understand what's inside the terrain as remedies. And I could just say, even if I couldn't do anything with chemtrails, at least in my mind. I mean, there's lots that could be looked at, but I know one thing that goes on, and even under Title 50, even underneath the war powers imposition on everybody, they have to give you notice. And so even if I couldn't deal with the chemtrails, because it's up in the sky, what am I going to do? I need evidence, folks. I mean, this is the whole problem. How do you get the evidence? For me, I'm evidence-based. So how would I get the evidence? I don't know. I guess I'd start learning how to fly a rocket ship that would get me up into the 40,000 feet, or up in the stratosphere there that they fly, whatever, so I could get samples. I mean, or make rockets that go up and take samples, and I can collect back up. We got all kinds of things that might work out to be able to take samples. We need evidence. Well, even so, how are you going to work? Well, I don't know about all that, but I do know that if you look under Title 50, where they get the license to come and do this to y'all, without disclosure, and we don't even know the funding, you don't have to find the funding, they do have to give notices they're going to be doing this, and typically, that's given to you in the public. There's some notice somewhere that you can find. Well, I would start there. And I'd go maybe to your county. If you want to start stopping that, you go to your county. Listen, here's what's going on. You lay the science out. You have to educate people that are not aware of it, or may even be been told that there's nothing they can do about it. You show them that it's real. Once you say there's nothing they can do about it, you now have them agreeing it's there. It's just they have nothing to do about it. Then you suggest something on what to do about it. So in your county, you would just assert that they have to give you notice about that they're going to be spraying above you. Now, you may not be able to fight it because it may be on a military standpoint, so it's only on need-to-know basis. National security may trump all of this. I don't know yet. But I'm just saying, there is a way, even in something that's way above your head in the sky, you might be able to deal with it. Another thing about the Wi-Fi 5G, I know Gary L. Has focused in a little bit about this and the 5G rollout, and there's actually 6G, I think I just read, coming too as well. It's already planned a lot, way far ahead of us all. There's groups that are engaging right now. Maybe find your way into a group and start working with them. I would just make sure that it's something that you can prove real evidence with real procedures. Don't make up procedures. There's a 5G condition that somebody's come up with. I would say confine this process. It's a UCC process ultimately when you look at it. Confine this process where you to the 5G rollout where the companies are doing this and the smart meters, and they're doing this without your consent. You make a written contract with them in writing. You don't wait for them to make you one. You make it in your writing, and you establish that their actions will cause a contract which causes the liability. Then you put the liability on them. Well, there's a UCC process for them. The process I looked at, I won't criticize it more than to say, although the gentleman says it rolls out in threes, there's a little bit of you could go that way. I used to go that extensive, but when you're being harmed, you don't need to go through the formalities. You just have to give the sufficient recognized due notice. And so you would just I would roll things out a lot quicker than having to do everything in threes and the expense of it and all that and the time. At the time, the expense is irreparable harm. Now we're back into the equity action. So you set a record really quickly, you make a contract, and now they're situating themselves pretty liable to that if they move against you. And I mean, you're doing this in a spirit of good faith and honesty. You're not trying to get them doing it. You have to kind of wait till they harm you. So you can address the 5G that way too, but you have to get into the subject matter. It's just not just a one-shot. I think the request is there's one-shot letter that we could send to everywhere, and they know. Well, I don't know of a way to do that unless you were to run an equity action through a court and get a judgment. And then you have to tie anybody who aids and abets what you sued to enjoin. Those agents you can then give notice to. That's how you would do that. So there's a provision to do it, but not from just an unconnected, I write a letter and now I'm commanding the world to comply by the law. Understand as well, and I've had my detractors when I say this, but these people don't understand. They're excusers, and they just want to go off and do their thing and try to be they want to make themselves look relevant, and they're not. But you don't have the kind of remedy that you would expect in a system of crime. You have a remedy, but because it's a broad system of crime, it's like you stopping a gang of people. You have the right to witness the crime. You have the right to say, halt, stop, you're under felony arrest, but you know what the reality about that is. The gang's going to take you down. And so there's a pragmatic part about what remedy is. And the point is that you have to be there to be able to assert it, first of all. Whether or not you may be big enough to actually make the arrest, if you will, by yourself, that's a context, situation-driven condition. So we all have these remedies. How effectual they might be is really the question. And the bigger the problem, the more gang you're up against diminishes your singular remedy, although you've made the record. So I keep telling you, we've made a record. Jefferson Miney did. We made the record on how this thing all rolls out, is how you're being destroyed transparently. Will anybody ever come to help or understand that so they can use this as a stepping stone or help to enforce this problem now admitted by the people who run your system, the very people that you would go through, which the people that say, oh, you say there's no remedy, then why you go there? Well, we're not going there for the remedy. We're going there to out the fact that there is no remedy. Listen very carefully on how I approach this. And so you would have to look at this whole thing. And so geoengineering, you have a way of notice. You if they're not giving a notice in your county, then you have a county make an ordinance to make sure that through the Title 50 that you found that they have to give notice, so that they at least put it in the newspaper, and then you can go down there and ask for your due process. At least it starts a system of awareness, I guess, is the main point there. Wi-Fi, same thing. Get with people that have some answers. There is a contract initiating process that's out there, I understand. You may want to seek that out and start to utilize it. Understand what they're doing, though. And for myself, I believe it's there. The UCC's there to do it. I think they may be taking too many steps, but I haven't done that to see what's shortening the process up to what's specifically needed relative to your harm and the immediacy of your need. Why you would have to extend it out, I don't know. I'd have to be talk to someone about that. But this is all within our knowledge base, our skill set, how we've researched and the depth of our research. The assault on our freedoms, the assault on our say freedoms within the context of a civil society, and your adherence to norms, norms of conduct. Again, you're not violating people, within that assault against you, to be free to do that, that's a pretty broad subject matter. Again, you have to focus on the one thing. One in the UCY chat, there's someone who's being harassed by a cop on the street, and so although I don't want to give any advice because it's all event specific, my thought immediately was, well, you need to go down and make a record of that harassment, and then state in that record that you fear retaliation from this officer or the police department that's doing it, and then you cite that these things are this type of activity has actually been found to be a violation of law in the place that you're at. So what you do is you make that written record. Now, I have to be careful to say you do that because maybe another form of retaliation comes. But if you put that into your letter, you anticipate the retaliation, and when it happens, you now bring your cause. It's immediate. And then you use that in your defense if they ever try to do it harder, because that's, again, what happened to me. Remember, a long time ago, what got me focused on this, I got stopped on a traffic issue that was fabricated. I almost died in that interaction. This is right before the cops started shooting people, long time back. And I turned around and started writing letters to the department, the police department, that officers were employed by. It took me 6 months of writing letters, and it wasn't like every day. There's a time of wait, and you got to wait for them to respond. So there may have been 6 or 7 letters in that time period, but by the end of 6 months, those cops were gone. They did not follow me in town anymore. I never got hassled. I never got anything put on me, and there was effect that many, many, many months later, after a year and a half of that, I was able to extend that traffic court. They didn't want to mess with me. I told you a little bit of the story. They happened to come on me at a party, an afternoon barbecue. When they saw I was there, the cop who happened to be the guy that knocked on the door was the one that stopped me, had to go through my court system in defense against his stupidity and his illegal action, which he got raked over the coals by the judge when we got done. He didn't want to have anything to do with me. The guy the door that he knocked on, when he saw that I was his friend, he didn't want to have anything to do with me. So, okay, that's a little victory right there. Avoided a big problem potentially with these guys that were, got their head screwed on wrong because they got a badge or important. My point is that until you engage these things in a more proper fashion, look to see what the requirements are that make them liable, that expose the liability, make a written record. Stop the oral nonsense. I heard this week I've had a lot of people talking about, they talked about this with the official and talked about that with the official, and then it was denied later. Yeah, that's exactly why you put it in writing. And if they don't want to make a record, you file the letter and you explain what the context of the conversation was. You make a record anyway. If you're going to be into the law side of that, the legal side, the administrative side, you do it return receipt requested. You make an evidentiary trail of your record. So there's ways to get at all this, and a lot of subject matter here. When you go through the intent to defraud, the accessory to felony, the crimes against humanity, I don't know about the crimes against humanity. This is going to be a crime against you or those similarly situated. That's the equity statement. No confidence, etc. Well, those are specific. All those effects, those violations are the effect of a cause. And those will stem from your specific wrong you want to make right. And you have to detail those evidence. So all this in one big glop of stuff laid on a desk is too much to deal with. You deal with all of this specific event, specific issues. Don't do yourself a disservice already to run yourself over with all that it looks like. I just tell you, folks, when the government goes bad, your list of harm is longer than your arm written on a sheet of paper. And when you start to realize what the dynamic of the burden is, you start to realize what I've told you. You only pick the first 3 or 4 or 5 things that are the worst they've done, and then you make sure you get those. The rest have to just kind of go by the wayside. It's just too much work where the burden is placed. And the burden's placed rightfully so. It protects against frivolous or wrongful complaints that you shouldn't bring. But when you have the evidence laid out through your letters, and it doesn't take a lot, and you don't have to go page and reams of paper, you figure out, let's say, a felony, the felony of extortion. When you go to your state code, and I've had a couple people interact with me, they're in the state codes, folks. I haven't had time to go look around the states to find them, but as we go through and I have them looking, they're doing it real time on the internet. It's really kind of a cool tool, the internet, to go look immediately. They can find in their states where these statements are. As I was saying, I'm sure that these are all felony extortion, felony coercion statutes, the extortions on the property and violation of the property interfered with under the color of authority without warrant to do so, and then the coercion is relative to the rights. Not the property, but the rights. And so you have to delineate this in your letters, and you just do it almost copy and paste, and the only addition you have to do is the specific conduct that or omission that happened in the instance of the violation of the wrong you want to make right. In that regard, I can't talk in so comprehensive terms. I can only guide you on how you approach this. In fact, there was just mentioned without, again, I don't like to give out people's information. I was dealing with working through a chat issuance with a bank. The very first thing I suggested is, instead of, this is one of those other things, you talk and they deny. You write the letter of the conversation you had, you make your record of what happened. Now they can't deny it. It's been in record. It's been in writing. You can, what they call, rely on that to become the basis for the cause that they've initiated by omission or by commission that harmed you. And so you set that up right in the first letter. And you look into the future and you say, okay, well, if you look at the subject matter, you say, well, it occurs to me this is what the guideline was, and you were supposed to follow that, and you didn't follow that. And you knew that. Well, now you got them on knowing intent in one sentence. So, but it's all specific to a harm, a particular harm caused wrongfully by a conduct or an omission. And so, I can't speak in generalities. I hope I'm clarifying some things here for a lot of people. Whatever you're doing is better than doing nothing, first of all. Secondly, just go look within the subject matter that your wrong is. And there's going to be things laid out in the codes and the statutes that are very, very helpful. In fact, I've told you, if we start there, we call it what I call code pleading, and it's not my term. I mean, it's just what you come to understand. And there's some other people that I've worked with in the past who viewed it the same way. You just go into those codes and you see that black and white is the objective basis. It's not opinion. They can't run away from this standard. And if you don't use it, then there's no real standard. That's when you start creating issues. And I don't walk in with an issue. I told you, I don't walk in with a question. I walk in and there is a set understanding of the violation. And it's all written down. It's not hearsay. It's not what he said, she said. So, I hope I'm clarifying some of these things for us. Whatever your crime is that you identify, you have to then build the elements in a letter, and it's really bullet point, folks. This doesn't even have to go that far. You just lay out the conduct or the omission to do something that they were supposed to do. You go find the law. You go find the thing that says so. Now, you just put it in a letter. Now you got them on notice. And if they can, you don't have to go many times right after you've defined that and they don't do a specific performance based on that obligation and duty, whether it's to the contract, that's your agreement, whether it's to an obligation and duty or to their oath which has an obligation and duty underneath, that underpins that whole thing. You don't have to go more than to, now you've got them in their liability. What remedy you use, what part of the law you go to use to get the remedy on that, that's totally up to you, and what the extended events may be. And I talk in that regard because when you start dealing with the government itself and the court system, you're going to have to think down the road a lot farther. Like, as I was telling you, the clerks of the court get in that they obstruct your remedies. You have to be able to figure out how to get through that. That's at least I put as much thought into that problem because it happens. It's a reality, and that shows you that there's an injustice, an unjust system. Just us, not you, and just cause, no cause. You have to think ahead on what these people are going to do to interfere with valid claims. As I've told you, I don't write paper that's a question. When we're done, when I laid out the facts and I laid out the cause and I do the objective basis, and I do it as summarily and cleanly as possible, there is no answer to that. And they don't. This is, again, I've told you, I've got three cases running. They're defaulting. But what's happened is the clerks get involved. Now they become part of the problem. You have to be able to address that. You have to be able to make a written record of that. But it's not on and on and on. And we don't talk about the Constitution and all the rights being violated. No, you just show how they're interfering with the remedy, and that was not wrong, has no warrant in law, that becomes an extortion all by itself. Or if it's against the right, it becomes a felony coercion. And then you tie other things, wherever little things here and there, in to fortify that very point. And so it's not explaining to people how much you know about everything. It's utilizing what you know in the most effective, efficient manner to get out the notice to anybody who's wronging you that's exactly what's happening, and you do it only in a way that doesn't allow them a continuing argument. There's a lot of work, I guess, in that part, but it's all possible. It's because the bottom line is the objective basis. The government is limited. They got their hands tied. When you finally really figured this out, we haven't enjoyed that, but because we're crickets. But when you finally figure out that the people that are in the government and the corporations are the ones with their hands tied, because the statutes say so, not you, not because of the Constitution. That's all fulfilled in a lot of this stuff as well. But because they've did a direct violation. Now, you don't have to talk so much. You just point out the violation. They'll deny it. They'll deny it till you sue them. And they'll deny it. Then they get the clerks to step in the way. And you got to go after the clerks then. And so this is where you don't have the remedy, I say, that the law provides. The remedy now becomes trying to expose the problem. You make the record, because here's another side benefit. When you're making a record that all these criminals are sitting in government, which everyone says is happening but has no proof of, that's different than myself. I have proof of all this. When you are going now and being confronted with them on a complaint of retaliation, they've got trouble. They got some really, really, really big trouble. And I think if more records were made in that regard, by being able to identify these wrongs that you want to make right, when they come against you, you've just created another cause. And at some point, even the dumbest people, the dumbest crickets, are going to have to take notice of that. And that I think eventually wears on people's conscience. So I'm telling you, the remedy has to do with the masses, as we're told, coming to terms with their own servitude, their own slavery. But that's a hard thing to beat. Remember, The Matrix is not a movie. It says, the gentleman Tank, was it Tank? Whatever, I don't remember the characters. He says, I want to go back in. I like the steak tastes so good. That's your society, folks, en masse. And so, it's not going to be such an easy deal. Let me move on here. Another thing about questions were made, and I don't have a clue. Actually, I'll just conjecture to my mind. There was made a comment that two videos I was asked to watch, FEMA trucks alongside the highway and stainless steel plates. Two different issues. The FEMA trucks look, just a conjecture, folks, and those of you that are dogs on the hunt and want to take this on, you may want to find there was money. Follow the money trail here, probably the fastest way to go after it. There was probably money spent to do this project along the side of the road. The problem I saw was with FEMA trucks in black paint, that it might be an internal thing, and that might go to national security. Not sure if you'll get to the money trail of the money it took appropriations it took to do that job. Looked like those trucks had self-loaders on them, and they were bin trucks, that they were literally cutting it only looked like they were cutting the brush and trees up against the highway. The FEMA was cutting that back. So I don't know what that would mean. That usually is done by a highway crew. Why it was done by FEMA trucks is interesting. So we move the level of why FEMA would be involved. Let's move it up with the project up a bit. The other secondary question pops up. What are these stainless steel plates over the median that you can see every so often? Well, just putting it together with no ideas whatsoever what they really mean. If they're clearing the sides of the FEMA is clearing the sides of the highway back 50 feet, taking all the trees, everything down past the guardrails, and then they're correlating with stainless steel plates spaced out along the median. I would wonder if we're not looking at a surveillance type of condition where those stainless steel lasts for a long, long time. It doesn't weather. It's easy to seal. Keep its polish. It's probably, and if you could find out they were marked out at some regular interval, like every 1/10 of a mile, likely you're looking at some marker for aerial surveillance. And if they cut back the trees, they get to see from an angle, along a distance away, what that is, and they could do a couple of things with that. Certainly they have surveillance of the highway. They also have ability to track speed and possibly other technology relative to computers and things that are looking into the sighting of the stainless steel reflectors. So, just a thought. Don't know what they're doing. At some point, they're making up the game that we're being attacked and they got to protect us. So, that could be all just a part of their exposure. So, but just big conjecture on that. I don't know. I don't get too, unless I can find out for sure. I don't get too wrapped up in some of the conjecture. I can't do much about that myself. Maybe some of y'all can. Maybe some of you have inside knowledge. Maybe you have people you can talk to. You can keep that relationship going to work out how you address these problems indirectly, actually, because they're not going to let you get at them directly. So if that's my observation. I don't know what the protective tubes, the 3 and 4 inch tube with cables or wires in it, I don't know what all that is. It seems like a vulnerability to me, but maybe it's, again, it's just an interim, it's an interim facility. Actually, a lot of that doesn't get attacked, so it's really not that big a problem. And that's just one system in many systems. So they've calculated that whatever's in there is where they can stand to lose it if there is an attack, right? And whatever level of attack you want to talk. I think it's all vapor, but that's me. Excuse me for being so frank on how we are duped into believing that there's really nothing going on. I mean, everything's pretty stable, folks. It's just part of it, why it's so stable is because we're crickets. Because I don't think once we start seeing and understanding what we're looking at and start giving up, I think it gets pretty doesn't have to get harrowing, but it's going to get pretty active here. Once we just see what's going on and we just go, the millions of us that can, just start hitting this thing everywhere. They won't know what to do with this. But they rely on the crickets, and you've complied. And I don't quite get that. Anyway, that's just the human nature. People that I work with, it's kind of disheartening for us to watch, but we just kind of put our head down and say that's reality, and we just keep plugging away. Speaking of a bit of which, but before I get there, let me drop this. Let me move over to now my tabs. I hope that answered the emailer. Thank you for being active in whatever you do. Don't worry about you being, what you think you're doing. Just focus in on something. Try not to take such a big bite. Just try not to take such a bit. Look at one thing at a time, and just deal with it that way. You'll probably go a lot quicker anyway, and you get to focus on the particular remedies. One thing I've been asking you all is to pull together evidence, make records, respond to these governmental thugs that want to keep you. Everyone, all the so-called anarchists want to claim, and the libertines and all the mental attitudes about politics, the political action of the society. There's always a complaint. There's never an action to do a damn thing about it. And that's really kind of how I'm getting to the point that that's all I can see anymore without trying to be closing my eyes to any other possibility. If you're going to complain and not do anything about it, you're useless to yourself and everybody else. And so I've offered ways to start getting at stuff. It's certainly not having the only idea. I certainly don't have, I only have what I've experienced and what I've worked with in the trenches, folks. I don't come from looking at some research and saying, oh, this is what it says and we should be doing this. No, this is, my work comes from just happened to be going through this mining law stuff and then property laws involved, and then you get all these other statutes and these rules, and you get all the administrative procedures, and all this stuff comes down to be available to have to deal with, and everything works about the same when you finally see it. And the comprehensive attack that's been going on across the nation and with people allowed me to work with them to resolve, if we could, their problems. Has allowed me experience in the trenches to keep people from being hurt, or hurt less, if nothing else. Again, I've suffered my own losses, but that was me learning how brutal it really is, and these systems don't work for us. That's me moving through the system underneath the delusion that the government's here to help you. Did the helpism? Remember, you did the broadcast and all this stuff. Time is now. How many times did I say time is now to get action when I did Revolution Broadcasting? How many times did I say that? Didn't I say that in the opening? I used to say the opening. So, time has been now, folks. I mean, this is the whole joke. We are crickets. And so what what I've been saying is you make a record. In the trenches, I found if you make a record, you set the stage in writing, your own black and white, not on your opinion, but in respecting the condition that you're in and documenting it, memorializing that condition. And if you approach it correctly, you're documenting that relative to violations of law, because the state that comes against you, the officials, they are constrained by that. It doesn't look like it, but they are. And so my experience, my advice to you is to make that record that sets the stage, that then speaks to the potential future retaliation. And I've found that almost 100% negates retaliation, because it's now in the record. And you've not just said they'll do it, you've pointed out that they violated the law, and now they're known to be willing to do it. And because you called it out, they're going to come after you, and so you're going to make the record of that for the purposes of remedy in the future. That's all you got to say. That's it. It's done. And when we do this, we make this record. It's not opinion. Somebody can't deny it. It can be called up. It can be used, as I told you, in a FOIA. Well, you didn't produce any documents involving this case. Why didn't you produce the letter I sent you? That's a fraud. You got them for something else. It's a whole different approach when you do it this way, but you got to get involved from the trenches, make the record of the right record. Has saved a lot of people. Miners are working right now because they're doing their work and their livelihood as granted by Congress, notwithstanding all the state oppression and all the federal oppression, because they make their records up front with the agencies they interact with. So that has given me some experience to tell you there is a way at this. Is it for every way? I doubt it. I mean, I don't know how many ways a criminal will come at you, but it's there. And so those of you that negate that in yourself, to think about that and approach these problems by saying, oh, your past history and understanding didn't meet that, I'm saying you didn't approach it that way. I don't need to tear no more. Show me how you approached it that way, and you hit the right points instead of going off on rabbit trails. Try and prove how much you knew. How many people have I known that will say they're a constitutional scholar, understand the Constitution, read the Constitution, they don't understand the dang thing. And they don't understand how it's fulfilled in how you do all this. And some of this stuff isn't even constitutional. And so you're applying the wrong thing to begin with. But one of the things I've been asking you, step out, get involved with this process that's oppressing you. Those of you that have an opinion to the contrary of the way the government works, you're the anarchist. That's how simple that definition is. It means nothing really more than that, except for when you throw some New Age ideology over it. If you don't like how the government's been running, well, we were told it was supposed to be better, and we allowed that to slip through our hands. There's a way to start to get it back. A true anarchist will grind away at that part that he found in the system that's not working. Not throw his hands up and say there's nothing to do. That's giving in. That's the accessory to the crime against you. That you agree to that. That's admitted by the other side to be a victory. They've done it. They don't care about you no more. You're irrelevant. So keep complaining. They love that. But you address it like I've seen that we address it. Boy, it sure changes things in a hurry. And so I've asked you to make a record. I know there's a lot of people that are in the cannabis thing. I was commenting to someone who thought, I guess they haven't heard me say this over and over on the broadcast. They wanted to know my position on it. I said it's a plant. The plant has, at this point in my life, I have, notwithstanding all the powerful things it does, if I say medicinally, as a holistic or normative life process plant, as I would do with my interest in herbs, I haven't had to need cannabis in my life. I have no interest. It's not of no importance in my life, but it's just a plant, folks. So I'd say it outward again, for those of you that haven't heard it. But I've said, for those of you that feel it's important, and the oppression against pot and the lie, the me for madness nonsense, all that, you can address it. Then if you're not addressing it, and why are you still complaining if you're not addressing it? Here's another set of things that came through the Twitter sphere, I think, that is available to you. And I thought this was brand new, but actually I found out when I did some quicker study, it's been around. So for 2 or 3 years, there's been a proof and an evidence against the DEA and the Schedule I holding of this stuff called cannabis, and its lack of utility as a so-called medicinal. And medicine has kind of got a funny origin. So I'm loose. We'll just use so I can communicate with y'all, not get so darn specific to it all, and the absolute absolute meaning of all these things. It doesn't matter. We got to communicate somehow. So I understand the limitations. I just want to communicate an idea here. Here it is again, and a reminder, not a brand new thing, from a 2008 website entry, just recently. Your Health Guide was a study that said first of its kind study finds virtually no driving impairment under the influence of marijuana. It was written by Dr. John Regan. I haven't checked if these people, if this is real or not. I just know when I tracked this down, there's a study. It's not even 2018 when this was done. This is not first study of its kind this year. This study was done a few years ago, 2.5 or so. So here you've had all this time in your DEA, Schedule 1, Congress, whatever the heck they're trying to do to oppress you with this stuff. When you start seeing this stuff, you also can go against the legalization of cannabis in the states too, which is another style of oppression. And it's the oppression to tax your production where they have no right to tax the production, and for revenue enhancement to the states to justify it. Again, this is just a big bribe. And you all can talk about it, or you can do nothing about it, or you can participate in growing and pay your taxes and shut up, and you're still participating in the theft. Why? Because they're taxing your livelihood and your production rights from your land on something that they've lied didn't have an effect, contrary effect, or didn't have a medicinal value and had contrary effects similar to alcohol. Here's a study for those of you that want to start to engage that you can use. Copy, get the blogcast or get the link, start running through this. Just the guy's posting here, this is Dr. Regan, as cannabis prohibition laws crumble seemingly by the day, it's allowing more research to be performed on this psychoactive substance that has long been part of a human experience. The first study to analyze the effects of cannabis on driving performance found that it's caused almost no impairment. The impairment that it did cause was similar to that observed under the influence of legal alcohol limit. So the impairment was under the limit that alcohol starts to be a problem. And so I won't read more. Here, just get the links. Came through. I thought it was a new study. Okay, here's another one. To me, I said it's not important. Maybe to you that's important. Cannabis is important to now for whatever reason. You want to protect your space. You want to go against the anarchy of that you are against the oppression is now brought to action. You can take this study as one of a list to go back and address the fact of this fact. No, it's not no impairment, but you have to be able to show that where that impairment is up to, and it doesn't actually reach as high as alcohol starts. So there's a definition here. It's called SDLP, and it's the standard deviations of lateral position. In other words, lane weaving. You always got to make this sound scientific. This is another joke that's delaying in here. But anyway, so we got to learn that what the SDLP means is standard deviations of lateral position. It means that while under the influence of degree of lane weaving within the lane that you do. And there's another definition here, OF, that you're going to hear in the conclusion. That's all I'm going to read. You can read the rest of it. Oral fluid. And what's interesting about this is a bunch of, again, scientific-sounding gobbledygook to make transparent to you a very easy-to-understand concept. But here's a short paragraph of conclusion for this first-of-its-kind study that was actually done 2.5 years ago that any bunches of you could have been using in the pile, throwing it at the DEA and throwing out actually the facts of the stupidity behind what you rail against is oppression, and to show the people, just take the foundation out from underneath them on all the nonsense that they've been putting on people, that cannabis is important to. Here is the problem of not that it's medicinal, but that it causes an impairment that under driving has to be analyzed. And then we see a couple of other truths in the conclusion as well, that this standard deviations of lateral position was a sensitive cannabis-related lateral control impairment measure during drive blood THC of less to or equal than 8.2 micrograms per liter increased this lane weaving, similar to notably impairing alcohol concentrations. That was the bottom limit. That's as much as it starts to affect you, as if it was treated as if it was affecting where the alcohol starts to affect you. Then the next sentence is even more interesting, and this now addresses the problem of tests in the field and the impropriety of these. That this study, which again, if you want to go scientific basis and the best science available, there's no other thing that they have available apparently, because this was the first of a kind study. Understand the power of this. That despite the oral fluid, the OF's screening value, the OF, the oral fluid's variability, poses challenges in concentration-based effects interpretation. What was that a mouthful? What does that mean, folks? It means that your tests for the oral fluids, for checking the concentrations relative to impairment, are challenged. The interpretations are challenged. They actually can't be used in a court of law. Now, that means you still got to go in and tell them that. My point is, if this is the case, then you have a way to attack the policy, the transportation policy, regarding this substance. And to me, if people are impaired, I don't want to get run down by it. Not that I don't think a marijuana or a cannabis smoker would do that, but we don't want to entice people to start doing things that are dumb. At some point, if you're impaired, you're impaired. Be smart. Be intelligent about it. But where the system comes down to make this as a provable evidentiary standard, you have a study right now that proves not only are other tests show studies showing that its medicinal value, even under the influence when using it, it only rises not up to the level of violation of alcohol. And so if those of you were to do something, instead of complain, just merely complain about how corrupt the government is or how bad the government is or how useless it all is, if you were to correct it by some correct action, you have this study to start doing that. So, again, here it is. You can understand, you can read, you can do the clicks anymore. The information's right here for us to use. I hear crickets on its use. But so be it. So be it. Keep complaining. Keep being the crickets, and I don't know what relevance you become after a while. After a while, you have to be thinking about this. If you're not thinking about it, then I know you're not thinking at all. But relevance is that to completely continue to complain without doing anything, even if it's not what I've found and you found something better, not to do anything. Come on, folks. This is right here. Start with what I'm offering. Just start to engage. Whatever makes an interest for you in your life that you feel oppressed against because the man, which is not, this is another semantic destruction against us. It's not the man. This is what you have to do. You have to make it the man who's behind the authority that's violating his problem. The man or the woman. But the man is an authorita. And so we can keep playing games in ourselves, or we can actually go right at it, make the record we need to make, and show that their impositions are incorrect. I don't know if you know this, but even if you take this kind of a study into a court, you can destroy the validity of any test with this study. And so if you're forced into the system, you have one more thing to throw on the pyre to dismiss the evidence against you for. It can't be evidentiary. And a rule of evidence is sitting there to guide you in the black and white on that it's there to do that. And again, if you're going to write a letter, you could do this not on this point about maybe a ticket, but let's say you were doing it with an administrative imposition. You could lay that out before. You could lay out the fact that this study would be interfering with, and the evidence is used even though it's not valid. And so there's a fraud. Actually, in that regard, it also works out to be what you call a fraud on the court. We're not talking about the court here. The term fraud on the court is literally the denial or destruction of due process. And so you bring these powerful positions in, and you move this forward before you get in trouble, or those around you get in trouble. And that's all I've been advocating. So then we go on, okay, so then we have an effects of this use of cannabis, which it only raises right up to the level where alcohol starts to be the criminality, which means there's no impairment that could be criminal or criminalized, notwithstanding the statutes that say otherwise and the tests that are out there to prove it. We now have this one test 3 or 2.5 years ago. I haven't heard anybody bring it up. It just come to the Twitter sphere like it's a brand new thing. Well, on this same website by this guy, supposedly this doctor, was another story. Breaking news, U.S. government admits cannabis cures cancer. Well, I thought this was a story from a few years ago. Sure enough, again, this website is like coming on. This is now documenting these studies, which is powerful. But it's coming out in 2018 for things that have already been would have been in our bag of evidence to help anybody who would want to step up to understand this, or to help fortify people that are questioning their potential need for the use of cannabis that is important to them. In my situation would be where herbally it becomes a tool or a tool to use for your health. U.S. government admits to cancer. You can get the links again. I just went through to see, okay, what's the validity of this? And sure enough, it comes from another website that's, what is it called? naturalsociety.com. But that's not good enough. Okay, that's a list. It gives the website gives me a nice summary of what I'm going to go find. Well, I'm looking for the study, or I'm looking for the source. Well, sure enough, you can get right over to the cancer.gov. It's the United States the United States government's website, where they mention the very same things. And the government you now see through the cancer.gov is evidence that cannabis is medically effectual in certain ways. And let me just give you a list for those of you who might be interested. But it uses a simple bullet point. You could take and just go to their the cancer.gov website, copy and paste into a letter saying, in an addressment against the regulation or the Schedule 1 impropriety, whatever. It's all copy and paste, and it seems anymore. So I went through it. Sure enough, it's down there. I found the government website. It agrees. I'll just read it because it was nice set up in the Natural Society's website. There are the findings of the NCI have included cannabinoids may inhibit tumor growth by causing cell death, blocking cell growth, and blocking the development of blood cells needed by tumors to grow. Go on to the next one. Cannabinoids may protect against inflammation of the colon and may have potential in reducing the risk of colon cancer, and possibly in its treatment. The next point, a laboratory study of delta-9 THC in hepatocellular carcinoma, liver cancer cells showed it damaged or killed the cancer cells. Another list right here, on and on it goes. The laboratory study of cannabinol, CBDs, not the THC now, the CBD, is an estrogen receptor positive and estrogen receptor negative breast cancer cells showed that it caused cancer cell death while having little effect on normal breast cells. I'm only reading parts of these paragraphs here, folks. It's how fast you would just highlight the best thing and move on to your next bullet point. Again, it's a bullet point, as a matter of fact. A laboratory study of cannabinol on human glioma cells showed that when given along with chemotherapy, CBD may make chemotherapy more effective and increase cancer cell death without harming normal cells. Again, there's more to read. Here, bullet point this thing out. You want to say the government says that there's harm, that it is not medicinal value. The government contradicts itself. And if you prepare the approach right, those of you that are interested in the cannabis, you can set the government against itself, and you're walking in as just someone said, listen, you're going to have to resolve this incongruity because you're harming people. And now you become the tip of the spear for a bunch of people that may not understand how. When you listen behind the woodshed, you're given a little bit more power than I think most people have in society to take a step. I'm trying to be pointing out all this stuff. You know, I don't know. All these things look like something I want to do. I get really kind of agitated because I want to get things fired up, but I'm only one guy. The rest of you are you guys and gals that can be maybe kind of like me in one particular subject matter. I've had to be pretty broad, but for you, you can focus on one. And you can get together with groups. I mean, how tough is it to copy and paste the website facts that you can find on the government website? Come on. So, here now, and I'm not interested this much in it. But when I become interested, I'm in a state where we can grow. I'm not worried about it anymore. Used to be you'd lose all your stuff, but, and then as I've told you, the legalization of non-medical is a problem. So, it would have to be conditioned, I would say, to protect yourself, conditioned in a medical use. And you see that you can use this, and they say the word may impossible in science because, again, science is this continuing study of what works until proven different. And so they can only say possible, but it actually means it's doing something. Until you find a counter study that says it doesn't, that was a misobservation by a peer-reviewed type of thing, it can stand. because they have nothing else to put up against it. See, this is the balance part of the evidence. It's all, your whole life works this way if we would just start pushing it forward. Evidence is reduced to writing. It's that simple. Yes, it could be oral testimony, but that testimony is reduced to a transcript. It's written. Why? Because the reviews of all that go on in writing. It's objective, all this stuff. We're talking in the chat room about, at the time with the cannabis, about the fact of opinions. I'm not really into opinions anymore. I mean, the trouble that I see is not opinion-based resolution. You all can have an opinion, but like I said, your opinions mean really nothing to what I do. No disrespect to anybody with an opinion. I have my own, but really, when you're focused on the battle, you better not be. You're not going to be throwing opinions at the enemy. You better have a weapon, and it better be loaded with the ammunition you need. So this is I find myself in that. So that's my reality. I understand, but I've chosen or find myself in a place where once I see the harm happening around me, I had the capacity to help others and myself. I mean, it starts with me being almost killed, and then it works out to today. It's just part of what I do. It's really not even a question. But opinions are really useless at some level. I mean, I used to do it. I used to talk about all this philosophical stuff and us and all that stuff, but it doesn't work when you are in a war where the next moment someone could be knocking on your door or you walk down the street, you might meet them, and they've got the power to kill you and get away with it. We're living in a little bit different day that for me it's not quite the simple idea that we just walk around lofty in our opinions and can ignore that. Now, that said, it's everyone's free choice. I don't hope I'm not thinking like I'm imposing, although part of me wants to impose because I want more help. I want more help for us. I want us to be help for us. And that's really the only other driver. Otherwise I really could care less at some level if it really is not going to go anywhere, but I think it's going somewhere. We were talking at the miners district meeting, Jefferson Mining District meeting last Friday. The website is it's a valuable tool for getting information to the government as well as to private miners and anybody else, even the Greens, the terrorists. They all have to come and look at the fact of our objective basis there. There's no opinion. It's a powerful position to be able to come from. And it really reduces our workload pretty quickly. So another thing that goes on, so the government lies on the one hand. It says that it has no medicinal use when their government websites show that it does in fact have and has had on their websites this, notwithstanding their patents. Remember those patents for the government utility. Again, the bottom line. But you have all that power. All the people that complain about being oppressed or having to complain about paying taxes and all this regulation about cannabis, stop your whining. Either get in the game and use this stuff, or just shut up about it. Yes, I said shut up. Just stop. Stop the complaining if you're not going to do something. And in the past, I've had to pay my own way on the errors of my action. If you put yourself in jeopardy and you had to cough up some penalties, then you didn't do it right. You didn't do it. Admit to it, reform, step back, and reanalyze the thing and say, okay, if that's really important to me, how am I going to address that better? And I'm suggesting to you strongly that there's a way to do that. I'm evidence of the fact of being able to address things better. But it requires that you settle down, very narrow issues that are important, that are violations. Not go sweeping and wide. If it's a contract issue or it's something underneath the UCC, go ahead and use the UCC. If it's not, don't use the UCC. But there's steps within the UCC that are found in other things that you do, whether or not it's in contract goods or things or securities. They're all consistent. I said there's a thread of consistent due process in everything, in every different jurisdiction, such as equity, common law, admiralty, UCC contract, merchant, all that stuff. There's a thread of due process that's required in every aspect. They all have some of them have slightly different names. Just key into that. And the steps are you have to make the record up front of what the facts are to highlight, and then you show that they're contrary to some existing objective basis, not your opinion, but the objective basis. And in the administrative side, they failed to meaningfully address that. Or in a, let's say, a contract dispute thing, a resolution, that it breached. It was a breach, clear breach. And you only, for the working one against the government, you just find the clear breaches. Don't try to make an issue where they have a question that they can come in and beat it up with their attorneys. And as I say that, there's I guess the girl that was fired ostensibly or purportedly because of her firearm permit. She came back in a Twitter and said that probation, it doesn't matter if she was on probation if they use the gun as a reason. Well, to me, it was she's coming out she came back was kind of dismissing the point. The bottom line in all that is that if in that state, underneath her employment contract, they don't have to use that part, and there's no record actually. If it was just orally stated, they don't have to use that. And there's other factors that under a probation status, she could be fired, and justifiably so. The permit issue is irrelevant. Taking the attitude like, nice try, guys, that's not going to protect her. And this is what I'm not here to attack her at all. If she was fired for that, and the state law and employment contract didn't provide for it, that's a breach. She has to address that. But it may not be the mitigating. I mean, in other words, if I said, oh, she's a black woman and I fired her, if she's totally incompetent, what she's saying is that because someone mentioned that she was a black, well, she's not, but I mean, if they mentioned she was a black woman and then she's fired, all of a sudden that's like carte blanche immunity that however bad she is, she's going to have a job for life. I don't think it works quite that way. And so there's going to be the balance. And if you throw the issue before the courts and between the attorneys, don't be surprised what you get out of that. And so again, employment's a little bit different. It is based on these issues. You're a slave, and that's how you're going to be treated, and understand it when you're walking in. But to get all uppity and hyped up around some of this stuff, I get real cautious. There was a violation. We're talking about the gun laws and the improper legal actions that are going on, how they contort that, and this may turn into one of those. I'd hate I hate people to get involved in the wrong side of that story without really sitting back and saying, well, this is a more extended condition. It may be that there is a written evidence of it, and it may be that was preclusive. But I haven't heard anybody point that out, and so I'm a little skeptical looking at other states' employment conditions. The point is it reduces down to the evidence in writing, or what can be put into writing. And this is how you get treated. And until we come to terms with that, we're going to be a bunch of whiners and complainers and do nothing. So we'll be the accessory to the crime against us. So the government, again, it finds out that the cannabis, the reefer madness, is not really real. One study, now you have a study there. It also has denied the findings of another part of the government. I always love having two agencies fighting at each other. Every time we do that, we win. In particular, when you're substantially in the law and there was a violation, and you find a government entity that has oversight capacity, you can take out the other one. Pretty cool technique. And I've been experienced in two of those operations where we actually once we found out what the authorities were, that's how we set up the record that was made to invoke that power. And we just stepped back and watched the cat fight. There wasn't much of a cat fight. The one with the authority in the government won, and that was on our side. So now we have this continuing thing, moving on what the government does allow and doesn't allow and promotes. A documentary that came through was a docu-series, they called it. I wanted to call your attention to it, called The Truth About Vaccine. And I was on the trail of this marijuana nonsense about it being criminalized, but then you also find it kills cancer, which means that the government's covering up this bottom line thing, as a pharma, as I was telling you, biopharma stuff, that they'll impose upon you these vaccines. If you look at vaccines, I'm not saying don't get them, look at them. This is the whole point. And this docu-series points that out. This is not about being adverse to vaccines. This is about understanding vaccines and being available to full disclosure so we can give our unbridled consent without feeling like, or not being adversely affected without actual remedy. The one being given is not sufficient. In other words, the vaccine court, which by definition means that there's harms in the vaccines. But what I found important about this docu-series, what the government allows, It denies that there's any effect in marijuana, but it allows this vaccines, which in their product data sheet show that there's harms. And if you do any studies, you find out there's things they can't do, is fortified in this series. This thing that the vaccines can't do is be safe. And if you're looking for an authority beyond what my opinion is, beyond what an expert might say, beyond what even your own research would say, and something that you need to use as evidence to step back from an imposition, you just don't get in an argument with people or doctors that are authorita. You look at this video, and you find in the video, and what I tweeted out was so pretty amazing statement. I'd heard about it, but to see the court opinion is pretty powerful. To see the black and white on something that authorita takes as authority is powerful evidence. If you're looking for a way to give yourself a place and time and a step back from this imposition, when you go through this series, you'll see all the stuff talked about these vaccines, and they got some major questions. I'm not here to discuss that. I've already covered a bit of that. But here's the statement that I've tweeted out. It was, then I get this. Seems to be my little hashtag for these newfound pieces of information that have been there that no one seems to use, that we now hear about. There's a Brucewitz versus Wyeth 2011 vaccine case, where it states in summary, and you have to go read the case to understand how they did this, because they don't make this phrase, but this is the gist of this whole thing, that vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. I'm going to repeat that, folks. It says, this court case says, that vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. I'll read the statement where you find that. It's a definition, and then a condition. Unavoidable involves, quote, whether the vaccine, quote, in the present state of human skill and knowledge cannot be made safe, close quote. Unavoidable involves whether the vaccine in the present state of human skill and knowledge cannot be made safe. Relative to the statement, vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. And so there was an argument out in the Twitter, in the interweb sphere. Oh, well, that's not. They were saying that unavoidable action means they're important. Well, they're only important when you see what the standard of that importance is. And I found that importance. I had to go read for this. Anybody's objection, you got to kind of cover as well. Where I found a footnote at page 35 of the court case that I have a link to. You'll get that in the blogcaster. At page 35, footnote 4. That you'll find that the justification for this was based on a threat of death would happen if you didn't do it. And so these are unavoidably unsafe and okay when you're faced with certain death. Kind of put that whole thing in context, don't you think? About the way these vaccines are admitted to be unavoidably unsafe. The only time that becomes legitimate is when you're faced with certain death, when you read the footnote. Ought to give you pause for some concern. Should fuel your evidence bag here, fill it full of stuff here, that you can start to talk a lot more intelligently, and not just say, effing vaccines are no good, they're killing you, this, that, and the other. No, you show where the underpinnings of that it's impossible and why. You get a more intelligent approach, a better word in your mouth that really just copies and pastes the statements from the authority that the authorita resolves itself to. So I found this pretty intriguing. And again, I'm not saying that. In fact, they'll talk about this in the docuseries, that there's certain techniques in the vaccine theory that are viable. But there's this thing, I think they were talking about vaccines versus immunology or immunization. Total different concepts that get convoluted. This thing is the vaccine, the product that they attempt to do what they claim to be doing immunologically is unavoidably unsafe. And all I can tell you is that I mean, that's not even quite, this was not a question, it was just a confirmation. But they only talked in certain ways about how this might be unavoidably unsafe. But remember, the process, they can't, in fact, I think they might say it in the docuseries, they can't filter out certain things that are known to be harmful as well. So, here's your evidence if you want to take a step back against a force to be reckoned with. The standard, like in a place like California where they kind of strip you of everything, could be challenged, I think, successfully with this statement and the proof that the state would have to show that the mumps is a death by not getting the vaccination for MMR. It is a death sentence. I think would be a good solid way to approach that for those of you that are interested in vaccine sanity. I guess is the only thing I can come up with there. To keep going on, I'm trying to show you there's ways to approach all this given that you have an interest in any one of these subject matters. There's a way to seemingly, it seems to me, to approach all of it, and I'm using the same basic tools over and over and over. Just the facts change, and potentially the method recognized in law to approach it. A lot of these regulatory things are administrative side. There is no jeopardy at the point of the regulation side. There might be some if you're on the other side, but you notice these regulation things are for businesses in commerce. But do you think that the so-called driving is any different on the enforcement side? No, these are businesses that are making profits and regulated. And so there's a clue. There's a clue on how that works. There's a clue on how to start to work through addressing that. Am I saying you go out there and throw yourself, what's it called, antagonistic to the court system, or just your way of the highway? No, they'll tell you about that. Or your way of their highway. They've now taken over that highway because you don't understand your right to it and how to displace them properly. And so this is what I've been trying to point out. How many of us have been in before court cases in traffic court and lost? Well, I've now all those ways are wrong. And so we can't say we sacrificed one for the team because we got beat down in a court of law that we didn't understand, or the whole understanding of the condition. And then didn't understand the underlying right where it came from and how to out that system for its oppression and occupation over that they have no right to. In the process, educating people the more proper way to identify what is ours and what is not ours. If I'm not a regulable body, all this stuff that we're talking about is not for me, but it adversely affects me. See, once the people, I guess, don't understand here, when we went to cannabis and went to recreational, and went to medicinal and private medicinal, they kind of blew the cover of the whole thing, because now anybody can claim that your business commerce regulation is now affected my private rights. And you did that without a warrant. Now I'm back to look how fast I got to the extortion and coercion felonies. Because now you can produce these cases, the studies that show that it's not, even if it's within their police powers, they have no proof that it's within their police powers. And they're still adversely affecting your right to produce from your own land. Man, I decided, I don't think about this stuff ahead of time, but I'm telling you that was go back in the last few seconds of what I just said. There's how you approach this stuff in a nutshell. If I kind of run too fast, I want to go back and tell you, go back to that part of the tape right now in the file, go get the download and go back in that time that I just spoke, whatever time it is. And that's how you do this. You find your underlying right that they're violating underneath an authority they don't have that makes no warrant, that means they're interfering with your right and your property. Those are 2 felonies that are actually 4. You got it right there. I don't know what's so hard. That's a simple little letter, too. And you start shoving forward with this kind of stuff. And as we're doing this forward, let me say let's say a so-called traffic court, when we address the underlying right that they had no right to encroach upon in an equity resolution for irreparable harm, they don't answer, folks. They have no answer. But they're not answering because they're being silent to you on a letter-writing campaign. They're silent in a court case that they have the obligation to answer, creating their liability to their failure to answer. There's another nugget for you all. It's that easy, folks. Now, how you move that out in enforcement becomes a different condition, and that's not for me to say at this point, as I'm finally moving my knowledge into action in a coherent way that apparently cannot be addressed by the government. And it shouldn't be able to be addressed. I told you, I don't make a question. You shouldn't either. You should never walk into a question with an issue. You should resolve whatever the issue is they claim that there is. No different as I kind of addressed when someone said that what did I just say? They were talking about, the unavoidable. The term unavoidable means it's an important thing. Well, you have to address that. So you get that in writing, that is an incorrect response. Based on what? The footnote that says that's only as compared to an outcome of certain death. Is that viable in an unavoidably unsafe condition? You speak this way, not because I make up the words. I'm literally parroting what I read, a proper interpretation that Supreme Court statement was in a dissent. So what's important about the dissent is I'm not using her opinion in this case. I was using the facts that related to the case interpreted in an objective way. Given the word unavoidable means what it is, and given that unavoidably unsafe condition is an exception to be able to be used only in the face of death, I've got myself a defense. I've got myself an assertion of an offense. Well, if I had never said any nuggets here in a lot of hours broadcasting, I just gave you a whole bunch here in the last 10, so I'll just leave it there. Big Pharma paid millions in secret settlements after antidepressants linked to mass murder. Okay. Every time there are reports of mass shootings, there are a number of people who automatically question whether the suspect has mental issues and are taking medications and such antidepressants. And they go through and tell you, Big Pharma paid millions in secret settlements after the antidepressants linked to mass murder is part of the extension, not through the vaccine court, but what the vaccine court did as well. The court system can hide a lot of this, but here's the evidence that they're paying millions in secret settlements. Well, not so secret, I guess, if they get out, aren't they? And so we do have this question again, that what government allows for the bottom line of Big Pharma is not necessarily good to you, and what might be good for you, they fraudulently assert is not good for you. It's a whole nother train of proof, easy to show, that the government's not sitting in a neutral capacity as it's supposed to. It's gone into being public-private partnerships. It's gone where it's a trust breach, what's going on at the point of the government. And I can definitely see this being a land possessor, a possessor of a soil disposed exclusively and to exclusive use as a grantee of a congressional grant. This is very clear. There's a breach of the government to protect that. It just extends on out. Well, remember, this is political, all right? This is all political. In other words, commerce. And I keep forgetting to bring up in the paperwork, the organic documents. They agreed this was a commerce-fed republic. So it was not even a question here. The focus on so-called sovereignty is in commerce, just as I've been saying. So we see now that what Big Pharma is given license over to do by the government is now also damaging people in ways that's not being advanced by the kids who ate Tide Pods the week before they started doing gun rights policy over some problem that happened in Florida, which I addressed just last week. John Rappaport brings up outrageous chemical dosing experiments to force friendship toward migrants. A whole different type of angle, but that there's an incident that happened, or a test that was done to give people certain oxytocin-enforced norm compliance studies that showed that you can be made by chemicals to agree to something that's maybe not necessarily agreeable to you by interfering with hormones in your system that the government's been checking. But on this point, I want to point out that he says outrageous chemical dosing experiment. Yeah, it might be outrageous, but it's legal. Title 50 gives the government its own license to do this to you. Remember, chemtrails is sitting right here, too. I'll tie all this together. How do you get at that? It's outrageous what the government does, but is it legally? No, that's the license they give themselves to hurt you. And you keep agreeing that that's okay. And I think Lincoln, who was just a lawyer, another bar member destroying this country, is the evidence of that destruction. And we didn't prevail against it for all you Second Amendment holders. You didn't do it. We just didn't do it. So we have all this drug thing going on. The government allows pharma to harm you, bio to harm you. They underwrite this whole thing. They give license to do so. They do outrageous tests against us to try to find ways to change our behavior. Boy, isn't that bringing up technocracy and what this is, the environment, the social environment that is one of the three rings of a sustainable development has to do with your behavioral environment. It has nothing to do with the trees and the bunnies and the lizards and the frogs and all that stuff. It has to do with the social environment. So when you start understanding all these things, it's a whole different perspective that I come from in a lot of this stuff. That's just part of what I look at. Just part of how I approach thought process. It's much more supported than just a mere opinion about a constitutional violation, because we're all non-constitutional at this point in these subject matter areas, aren't we? You'll complain that the federal government has been extended itself, but you won't approach it that way. You just complain about it. That's not going to get it. And the more you don't get that, the more you complain and not act, it just comes on us. And a lot of us will be gone. A lot of people listening to me will all be gone. I'm hoping that we can hold what's called a legacy, show an example of a legacy of how to move the young ones in through their awareness, opening their awareness and how to approach this. That's what I'm hoping for. Somehow there's a legacy built. I thought, as I say that, I may have missed this, and I'll have to just say, wow. Thank you again for everybody who's been promoting the broadcast, but thank you for all the support you've been given over at Minds.com and BitChute, and thank you to Atticus for calling people out to go to BitChute. I got a little bit more, quite a few more there. Appreciate his Atticus is Gary L's and Gigi Wu's dog. Helped call people to the broadcast. Appreciate all that. The normalization of ignorance, and I think deprogram.net, I think, carries us as well. So the mirroring of all this is helpful and gets the word out. As I just try to tell people, this is not a hopeless thing, but it's hopeless. It's not hopeless because if you don't do anything, there's no hope. You got nothing to even complain about. But if you're going to get involved, there is a way to do it. The only hope is that you do something, because after you do that, there's no more hope. They're just doing it. It's really kind of jumps the chasm. Back into this chemical issues. And the idea of the drugs being imposed upon us, and then we have you got the legal ones, and then you got the illegal. To me, it's just all the big harm going on. And the government uses both ends of that in order to destroy us. President Trump came up and said he was inspired by China's hardline leader. He's like the emperor for life now, as a matter of fact. Xi calls for drug dealers to be executed. This is where we're starting to go. I'm interested that Duterte wasn't in the Philippines. A guy wasn't the president, wasn't mentioned as the first guy to say so. He's been the first one. So there's been a slight to that relationship as well, in a geopolitical sense. But Trump's coming out to say that we need to execute all drug dealers. And I got to be real careful. You got to be real careful not to think that it means somebody that's not you. If you're legalizing cannabis that the federal government says is still a drug deal, as a drug dealer. So be careful on where this goes. He's wanting to consider to execute drug dealers, and my question on that is hashtag. So let me get this straight. They want to execute drug dealers, and they want that to be part of a due process that they're already saying is a crime, while they're lying about its efficacy in certain drugs, We know the government actually causes the opioid problem. We know it's caused the marijuana problem because it's illegalized something that's actually found not to be harmful and actually beneficial. We know they declare wars doesn't help anything. And they're sitting here being the greatest purveyor of drugs, the government, by licensing these. Was Trump's idea, if they're going to execute drug dealers, to execute the FDA, the DEA, the pharma, the biopharma, and anyone else that's pushing the drugs in the government first. And see if that doesn't clear out some of the so-called illegal market. Is he willing to do that, given that the Chinese dictator, now King Emperor for life, is his role model for how we do this? If you think so, maybe you can get involved with trying to clarify how this guy Trump can say that, and the government itself is the biggest drug pusher. You're going to take out the CIA, I hope? What's it? You're going to execute the CIA with their interference with Afghanistan in order to make those drug routes for the opium epidemic that they fuel on the heroin side and then the opioid side on the pharmaceuticals? Are we going to execute all that, folks? Maybe that is a good idea. But does he mean that or you? He's going to execute those systemic instrumentalities, or is he going to execute you? Because you decided to grow some plants and they've decided that's in commerce, and you're a dealer just because the plant exists in your yard. Don't forget about how they move the gold line on you as well. So a lot behind all this. Okay, so as they, again, getting down to the bottom line, how the government licenses all this stuff, how they allow certain things to you happen to you, and how we think certain things are wrong, the incongruities about this. There was a report about plastic in sausages that caused recalls. In the same week, there was reports going through reporting about the top bottled water brands are contaminated with plastic particles. The first paragraph, the world's leading brands of bottled water are contaminated with tiny plastic particles that are likely seeping in during the packaging process, according to a major study across 9 countries published Wednesday. Now, I'm not going to go on. You just go ahead, keep drinking that water. Now we got plastic particles in this stuff. Okay, fine. Why was it that there was a big outroar and recall? Why did the government do this now? Again, the government allows the water to be produced. This is, again, Nestle says that water is not a human right to have. And maybe he's right at one level. Maybe he's not. Depends on your context, isn't it? And who has the water rights, right? But notwithstanding that, they allow these companies to make bottled water with plastic particles, yet we have a recall for plastic and sausage. So I wrote out a question. So sausage with plastic is not okay, but plastic in bottled water has been fine. Is the lunacy of your government not serving you or anyone else, serving itself, which you find, again, is this big, giant corporate type of structure that really doesn't care. It all gives lip service to keeping you safe and keeping you health, safety, welfare, all the police powers that they violate by allowing these anomalies. Right here, you're seeing that there is no basis for the regulation. Another thing you can add in a letter and use this as an example. Stuff that the government does that shows it's arbitrary and capricious in just how it exists. Now, Trump might not kill the drug dealer called the FDA or the DEA or whoever, the CIA, but you can, just by starting to point out this incongruity of mission, if you will. They have no actual basis from which they work, exampled by these conundrums that they've set up before us. Syngenta to pay farmers $1.5 billion in massive GMO corn settlement. Okay, they've allowed this GMO. This is that case where they put a GMO. It wasn't non-Satan now. This was Syngenta. And that was where they put, China found out that the GMO corn was over in their shores, and they said, we're not going to take this stuff from the United States. $1.5 billion payout for something the government allowed. If they could get away with it, folks. So if you'd be quiet they're going to get away with it. If you're not, oh well, you get your settlement, the class action suit. That GMO in the world caused what? A commercial harm. A commercial harm. Reduced it down, always down to that buck. And so this is another clue. Reduce your stuff down to a value. Like I said, in a couple of people I've been telling, when you put inside your letter, you got to put in a value for the delay and the harm, for the interference with your property or your rights. That starts to set that value. Don't be ridiculous. Keep it simple. Keep it normal. Keep it reasonable. Oh, 100 trillion, thousand, quadrillion dollars. No, stop it. It's so much value. Look at the objective value and equity of what the cause is, the harm of not having the property, the cause of not using the property, and the harm that could have been used to acquire other property with that obstruction. That has a value that can be settled down. It's kind of hard to figure out sometimes, but you can figure that out. You throw that value in a letter that as long as you continue to harm me this way, it's costing you this much money based on this reason. Not my opinion, but because of the equitable value that you're interfering with my property wrongly. Throw that in there, because that becomes the basis of your value, some certain at the end of your equity case, if it goes there. A lot of times you throw this stuff together, it won't go there. But anyway, so the farmers had to go. Those people that got the farmers who had a monetary value were able to go class action and find out that the GMO corn in the world was a harm. After the government allowed that it would be okay. So we now see the government embracing things that are not necessarily right. They put on regulations that are not necessarily right. They harm people. You get to come after the fact if you get to go through the courts and correctly and vindicate your property, your rights, or your harm that was caused by all this legalization. And so what do we find? The government's wishy-washy. I tell you, they're arbitrary and capricious. We complain about it. I'm showing you how you start to identify for the purpose of stopping it, if you will, step up to do so. FEMA drops climate change from its strategic plan. FEMA drops climate change from its strategic plan. The agency's strategic planning document does not mention the potential impact of changing climate on the risk and natural hazards. Is something you could read about. You can see how this is. It's not about, we knew that climate change was a crime. No, you got to look at, see what their basis for the decision is. And I want you to go, and you want to see the transparent? They took the word climate change out, but all the words they use are sustainable development driven, still sitting in secretly right in front of your face if you know what you're looking at. They've taken the word out, but their basis for operation is all sustainable development oriented. And that brings me to the news of this last week of the Florida bridge collapse. And I want people to see something here. You won't see it unless you see it. What they're showing you, there's the breads and circuses of this thing. It's a terrible thing to happen. People die on this bridge, this pedestrian bridge collapse. And they're going to throw a bunch of people under the bus that I'm not going to excuse their culpability and liability. What I'm going to say is they're not culpable, liable only. And there's a bigger story going on. And it ends up being, I can see this because we sued it in 2013, and it can't answer. It can't answer to the crime against you. All we did, though, we pointed out that it destroys property rights, it destroys the coffers of the Treasury, it destroys people's pocketbooks, it hurts monetarily. Now, we couldn't show at that time that it can kill people. I'm going to suggest that in Florida, you're witnessing a murder scene, not because the contractors caused an engineering fault, which they might have, but because of the underlying process you do not know exists that allowed that and forced it to be what you saw, is going to escape scrutiny. Well, not behind the Woodshed and not behind another colleague who I showed this to, it's his specialty to track this down, and I hope he comes up with what it looks like on the surface of the stories. If you go read the stories on how this folds out, you're going to see the evidence of the transparent cause for why that bridge happened the way it did. We won't know more what the engineering construction techniques and failures were, which will be thrown under the bus as the sole cause. But I'm telling you that what you're watching now, we now have proof, and we will have proof, I guess I should say better. The earmarks are all here in the reports, that there was a process behind the bringing into reality that bridge, which caused a system which honors only itself and not the product of what it's doing, promotes itself, that we now see where we could only attach it to the hurting the coffers and the private property rights. We now know that this method is not just a felony as far as that and the destruction of your way of life in America, or now globally. It's a killer. And so we have Miami Bridge the bridge that collapsed was a truss design despite the cosmetic tower support cables. Is really an interesting change in the story. They're now saying that what I looked at the truss system, I said that, in fact I have a Twitter out, I said, how is this thing not supposed to sag? Put pressure on its lower floor. I didn't see, the truss looks like it was upside down. It looked like it needed to be suspended. And then we find out that there was a plan to make it look, there was a post on this bridge was supposed to be suspension. Now they're coming out to, I think it's CYA, oh, those were not supposed to mean anything. Well, my observation is that if not, why did it have, a few days after being set in an innovative way, why did it have cracks at the middle of this span? Proves that there's a structural insufficiency on its own, whether or not it was actually designed. So what my concern about sagging, it didn't really sag. It actually did have some pre-stress in it. A slight arch. It wasn't flat. All the pictures I saw looked like it was absolutely flat. Until we saw the dash cam video, and I could see a slight arch to it. But it developed cracks right at the center, right before this thing comes down. Now they're trying to show, oh, that superstructure that all the officials in other departments are saying should have been in place to support that bridge, it was only cosmetic. Very interesting. Notwithstanding, that's not my proof. The proof starts to come the second day. The collapsed FIU bridge was funded by federal grant program, criticized for shoddy politicized review process. The term politicized review process is the clue. This happened and went through the consensus policy method. And this was going to be a university project. This is not some university just buying a pedestrian bridge from some construction crew. This is an integrated, all these words are important, an integrated outcome-based project that the FIU is going to be the lead agency on. In fact, you find out their first grant for transportation came from the Transportation Department or the acceptance of it as being a lead agency for this process of innovative outcome solutions was done in 2010. Their first money in 2013. So there was a lie to say that this bridge was made because of an accident that happened to a student last year, when in fact their first monies came in 2013. There's a massive lie behind the scenes. This politicized review process is your comment period process. It's the outcome-based process that defeats you unless you know how to respond to it. And I doubt that there's many people that can do it. And so that was the first evidence. When you start reading the rules, you see that this starts from the federal government. It's right on their transportation website for what they call accelerated bridge construction methods. It's an innovative construction. Well, innovative, everyone thinks is great and grand. It's like iconic and pristine and all this other aesthetic nonsense. Well, in my understanding about how this works, I'm not an engineer, never built a bridge. I've done some building, but not at this level. I'm not a civil engineer, none of that. It's just common sense looking at something going on, and I can talk to other people who have, and our complete concurrence is this thing was done wrong on so many levels. But we know that a few of my colleagues know there was a process that brought this out. And there is a thing that they do inside this process. It's called, remember, the stakeholders and partners? Remember, the outcome-based requires that you agree to the outcome or else you're out. This is the system that brought this bridge in. We're having a lot of evidence coming down. I'm going to be having more of a proof later. I don't have the time to do it at this point. That all the green, sustainable organizations are involved in the backside of this, coming from the federal government grant stream funding. We sued in 2013 only through the EPA. Transportation is one of those major problems for us in their handling of this condition. I was looking over and over for the intermodal connection to a transportation hub at the FIU area. Couldn't find it in the reports, but I did find, totally out of the blue, it pops up. I don't know how this stuff pops up sometimes on my browser search engine. a requisition order for the bridge, and it mentions intermodal hub, a transportation hub, right in there. So this is conforming. This is a major sustainable development imposition. This is not just the contractors making a mistake. And here you can see the collapse. I have a video. Anybody can search this out now. You can see what was going on at the moment it collapses, right square in front of a car on a dash cam. It didn't sag and break at the center. The fractures were found days before. There's actually a crane on the left-hand side. It didn't even slide off. There's something they're doing with the crane and some tensioning that they're trying to do to solve this problem. A stress test exposed that at some point they're doing something and it cracks right where they're working at the first section of the floor out from the foundation. So you could say, oh, they did something there. Well, yeah, what I want you to, don't look just at what you see. This project came by a process. This project has partners underneath some kind of an outcome-based condition. And they're integrated even by an organization that isn't even named yet in the news, that sits behind to manage how you're going to be a partner. And let me tell you, when you get inside of these things, you're going to find out to be a partner, you have to agree to the outcome of what these students are designing, ultimately, what they want and feel is handy and neat and nice under sustainable development considerations and social behavioral constraints, making sustainable living areas, sustainable transportation. This is a federal condition imposed that if you want to involve yourself, you have to agree to the condition that you are being accepted into. You do not have an input on whether or not you like it or not. You're just essentially to make it so. Now, I'm going to have some people that argue about that in the engineering field. We can see this happening directly locally when you have like firehouses. This is where this comes from. University students designing firehouses or police departments under massive million-dollar jobs, and you look at the architecture of them, and they're really just, they shouldn't be being designed that way. And then who signs off on them is an actual architect. They actually originated from the students of the university promoting that university. Well, this is FIU, Florida International University. That should have been our first clue. It's tied into an intermodal hub for the area, general area, a region they call it. You can't disregard the underlying problem of the originations on this. Where it actually starts is in the process. It's our way or the highway. And we now have the evidence of this problem being a killer. The way they did this is really not a problem. Modular construction is not actually a problem. But what leads up to this is a bunch of decisions that the reviews of all this was politicized. Don't forget that. Very important clue. And so my observation of the footing and the whatever, it looked like it would be sag. Well, there was pressure at the center. That they claimed that it wasn't. It was only cosmetic, and they would have to fix it. Well, hours later, they're dealing with some stress tension thing, and it collapses real time within about a second and a half. Comes right down and collapses as you might think the tensions would be. It all falls apart pretty well on something that's not made to handle that kind of a thing. So I wanted to, and I put a Twitter on this to maybe more just memorialize it. Never forget there is a method which brought this to here. I have the link to that collapse. The transparent method is now proven a killer if no one noticed before. And we have a little confirmation as well of an ironic condition, because these people want to promote this outcome-based crime against all of us. It's all over the country, folks. It's not anywhere. I don't think anywhere escapes. You'll see it in any place that talks about urbanization and urban-rural divides and all this strategic plans. But the mayor in Sweetwater, I think it was, makes this quote, which I thought was completely the truth after the fact. This bridge is symbolic of the growth of our city in experiencing and our partnership with FIU. Now, I will say, yes, this is absolutely symbolic of the transparent felony against everyone that moves sustainability into this nation. Since a long time ago. This is not just this week or last year. This is the method that we sued in 2013. It's right here playing in the news, and it proves that the politicized system, pushing the agenda first for the agenda's sake, is a killer. And so I want people to know about this. You can disagree with me, or it doesn't matter to me. I want you to know to look through the transparency of the fluff, the very real thing that killed people, the contractors, the engineering, whatever all you saw was real, people died. But there used to be a time in this country when it came to purchasing a bridge, you went to the engineers, they went to the architects, they took it on themselves to do it, and they did it tried and true technology, not innovative. In this state, in this way, innovative, where I was saying I'm not an engineer in this and that, I know the system, when they say it's innovative, it means risky, folks. This is the problem. Innovative is touted as something neat and new. Well, it is, but not. You don't want to do that with engineering systems that the people will interact with. You want to test them. Why did they stress test that modular construction alongside the road? No, they got this thing to prove. It was going to be a symbol of this sustainable fraud against us, a sustainable crime against us, how well it functions. So, the point is that you're not just looking at engineering defects, planning defects, whatever. Not planning, but structural engineering, construction problems. You're looking at a system that allowed that thing to be there that way. That is it looks like to me in the backside looking at some things, it looks like FIU is going to be the leverage funding central point that will be the source of authority for all other projects like this, possibly across the country, as we hear Trump saying there's more money coming for infrastructure. I think this was good. This was put on a rush table in order to prove out something, so that all the processes would run and funnel through this method. There was going to be a lot of money on the inside of this, big time. Everyone was positioned in the right place. When you look at who was behind this, it hasn't been named. Big corporations were involved. IBM was involved. They want the data from all this stuff. You wonder what it's about. Well, you start looking at what this is about. Remember, it's about social behavioral controls. They want the data on it. IBM's involved with it. Big construction companies are involved in it. You notice they're not being talked about. They're in the backside taking advantage of this condition they all know about. Mark Rubio, well, what's he doing? Well, he's a professor there. Oh, and it comes through the transportation department, all this money. This is an inside job, folks. So, I don't want to excuse the construction and fabrication of this, but I'm understanding that it was insisted that they use an inferior aggregate product, and maybe even just potash instead of the chemical they were going to do, because they wanted self-cleaning concrete. Oh, that's sustainable. It's self-cleaning. Well, it's deadly, folks. This is how this works. This is how this all comes down. So, yeah, I'm not going to get into more about the method, what it's actually promoting. Well, I've mentioned it. It's this process of subversion of the hive, the Borg, central control, central planning, central Soviet, if you will, not Russia. Soviet. It's a management style of societal behavioral insistence and imposition on your life. And this is now against. I said it's evidence of a crime scene, but it's not the evidence that you see on the news. It's behind the scenes. It's the process that I knew about a long time back. It's what Dean Gotcher will talk about, whether you recognize that or not. It's what he confirmed that I was looking at was true, because at the time I was looking at this thing. You can't believe that you're watching something so integrated in your life that you don't see it. It's really a phenomenal thing what they've done, these evil geniuses. So I want to be on record for you, if not just for the record, but be aware. What's happened in that is the evidence that this process can kill, and that process, that method of how they're doing it is federalized. The state buys into that. It's all buy-in, public buy-in. They get you to agree. It's happening in a town near you. Whether or not it rises to the level of a pedestrian crossing that kills people is not the point. They're destroying other things in your locale, wherever you are. Whether that's your rural life, whether that's just to put a dang sidewalk in, folks, because it's all part of a future plan. Whether that's putting your areas on the road diet, so you're going to use bus, mass transit, and bikes. Go green. Go green. That's part of FIU. They have a whole sustainable Office of Sustainability, if you didn't understand how tied into the global structure this is through the Florida International University. It's all right there in this project, folks. I just couldn't tell you when I looked at this and I saw the words being used, it was just telling me a whole new story about what the real problem of this is. So we now see, to me, Florida is the evidence of the method I keep telling you about is destroying us and destroying our lives and interfering with us. It doesn't come by any law, actually. It just comes by a bunch of people agreeing and buying into the crime against them, being accessories, and no one saying anything else. And that's got to mean to me that there's got to be some money on the back. There's got to be a money benefit somewhere, some kind of kudos, some prize that someone's getting in order to allow this to be so pervasive. This is one thing you have to see. If you don't, it's going to be your future, and it's not going to necessarily be very good. In fact, dealing with the mafia would be preferable, I think, as far as I can tell. At least inside the mafia, there is a certain respect. The only respect these people have is for the cause itself. They promote the creation, right? They don't look to the creator. They look at the creation that they have controlled in controlling you for your own good. And they'll promote that to the high heaven that they don't agree exists, and I mean in the spiritual sense of our own well-being amongst each other. So, it's a killer. I want you to see that. I'm sure everything I've seen, I wish I had a little more time to do it before the broadcast. I didn't. We could lay it out. There's a whole other facility underneath function of organizations that are all really part of the hub of how this project gets done. It moves, it facilitates, it moves this process along. It makes sure that they have all the data and tools they need from inside the system, and that's all you're going to use. So if you want, remember, this is on an international, this is on an international, yes, it's on an international scale, but a national scale. If you are a construction engineer, architect, or company, if you don't agree, given the grant money comes from the federal government, you will not have work in this country. If you're an international company, you won't have work internationally if you don't agree. And so you're somewhat hamstrung about that point. So don't underestimate the power, the coercive power of the process underlying this. If you've never understood it, I haven't clearly talked to you about it, I apologize for that, but it's there to be seen. You can go, I mentioned periodically about the consensus process, those things, that's where it kind of starts. It all stems from the proliferation of tools, international tools that came through the implementation of sustainable development as we know it in the West versus in the Europe. It's known as Agenda 21. They know, and we know that it's not my opinion. It's not a myth and a fairy tale. The Bar Association's own House resolution documents say so much. From, 1993? They explain in those House resolution documents for the Bar Association, they explain that the United States of America were told it was sustainable development, which you see accepted in 1992, and over the EU they were not lied to. It was called Agenda 21. And you heard William Roberts call that all the time. So that's how him and I got together. He was talking about Agenda 21. I was saying, yeah, here, this is the method inside the law. Like what I did for William Roberts with regard to the processing in the law that's already there that they're utilizing against us was the same information I was giving to Clint Richardson about within his study about here. It's already in the law. They've given themselves, these criminals are giving themselves license to hurt us. So it's already in there if you kind of know where you look. Well, I say, okay, it's already in there. What you have to do is find out how that's a harm to you, not by your opinion, but your ability to establish the facts of that harm. Now, I think we have that in Florida. Whether or not anybody goes beyond that, I don't know. I can't, I'm not going to be everywhere. But there it is, folks. Look behind the scenes of that. Go look at that politicized process. Go look at you want to start getting in rabbit holes, go look at all the organizations that creep up, all the creeps that are back there, that are organizations in name only for doing for moving this thing forward. All integrating these processes together, right in front of you, going right in front of you to your so-called leaders in your towns, all buying in as now a symbol of this partnership. How about if we stop the public-private partnership and we start doing the government as a trustee, protecting you all really, and not you being used as a black hole funding source for privateering? How about if we do that for once? instead of invoking this entire social engineering process to impose upon families, impose upon our way of life, kill our students now, kill those going to and fro underneath this innovative, secure, safety pedestrian issue. Let's go after the students now and push these behavioral controls, international behavioral controls in the United States upon our mothers and fathers and their offspring. Because it's about the social environment, one of the rings of Sustainable Development Agenda 21. State to enforce homeschoolers to submit to warrantless home inspections, trampling rights. I mean, I would just want to shut up now. If you don't understand the seriousness of what this method does, I don't really know what more to say and what more I could say. So I just have to resolve myself to explaining where I can. Anybody who has a particular question or whatever I see in the news that says here's some things you need to know about, hopefully one thing I say will inspire you to be more aware and maybe better able to address this and start thinking ahead of the problem. Under a guise of preventing child abuse, lawmakers in Maryland have introduced a bill that will allow the state to intrude in the lives of innocent families, keeping tabs on them and destroying their right to privacy. The bill, HB 1798, the County Board of Education Home Instruction Program, Observation of Instruction and Reporting of Abuse and Neglect, lays out some fairly ominous requirements that will persecute otherwise entirely innocent families for doing nothing other than teaching their children at home. Remember, home in the legal is a tax home. So let's move away from that, but that's not my point here. This is presuming, you see the clue right here, innocent families. This is the problem of the so-called law. This is the imposition. When it comes in contrary to your rights, you know it's not originating from your country. It's from outside and trying to impose itself. But given this point of innocent families, was my point when I was looking, well, where are they going to go? What's your defense? Your defense is in the presumption of innocence and other things. I don't have enough time here to discuss it. The presumption of the innocence they're actually defaming and mischaracterizing you as an abuser, as someone who homeschools, should be your first starting point. Whether you address this directly or maybe have to wait till after when they got the law in and you have to sue to enjoin it because it presumes upon you these criminal characters, these things, the lack of a capacity in you, even though you have them, and it is your right. Take your offspring as your property. Don't let it be the child's property, or the state's property as the child's ward. Take the offspring, your son and daughter, as your property, and that you will have the right to bring it up. You better have a foundation in law for your own, and you better be able to produce that you are doing something in order to defend yourself against the presumption that you're now a criminal. That's all the starting of this. It's a very serious problem. You're watching the Soviet encroach into the last vestige of independent thought, independent instruction and education. You can be crickets, or you can be and watch your families destroyed, and leading to students that are now, eating Tide Pods and then trying to design bridges. You can go ahead and do that, or you can step up and protect yourselves and your offspring. Thank you for tuning in today, Grimner. I hope. Thank you for what you do at reallibertymedia.com. Donations, folks, if you can, to that. Keep the servers. I think we got it up. But anything more would be great. Jules at ucy.tv. Thank you very much. All the help and promotion and support by people out there. Thank you very much for all that. This is up to you, folks. I'm doing my part, I hope, and just trying to get a direction for you all. Thank you for the emailer. It gives me a place to start from and kind of touch that. And I'll be with you next week, tech diffs or nature willing.
Well, that's another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
That's what opening up a can of whoop-ass feels like.
Son,
just opened a whole case of Warpath.